I'm Witt Siasoco, and I'm an artist that is working with the Cornerstone Group and Forecast Public Art on a year-long residency here in Richfield, Minnesota. And today I'm spending time with photographer Wing Young Huie, and we're talking a little bit about the way that art and communities intersect. And just wanted to read a little bit about the background. RARE, Richfield Artist Resident Engagement, is an artist residency initiative in partnership with the Cornerstone Group. The residency is designed to cross boundaries and disciplines and invite Richfield residents to participate in building its more vibrant future. Supported by an Arts Access Grant from the Minnesota State Arts Board and administered by Forecast Public Art. That's the funders. Photographer Wing Young Huie earned a BA in journalism from the University of Minnesota in 1979. Huie became a full-time professional photographer in 1989 and is most well known for his photographs documenting people in a culturally diverse and changing urban landscape. Several of his projects focus on Minneapolis and St. Paul neighborhoods. Huie's photographs have been exhibited nationally and internationally in St. Paul, Minneapolis, Chicago, Westport, New York City, West Palm Beach, Budapest, and Rotterdam. And I'm sure there's some to add to the list because this is an old bio.
More people have seen it in China than will ever see it here.
Well, thanks for coming, Wing. We've had many discussions, and just wanted to ask you, a little bit about your process, because I've always admired the way you've went about your work, and over the years, one of the things that really impacted me was Lake Street USA, and you've continued on doing really impactful work. I don't know, can you talk a little bit about how you go about starting a project and maybe what intersections with community that has?
Well, I think, I guess there's some things that are the same.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can see every project is different.
Mm-hmm.
There's some parallels, there's some continuity, I guess. But, when I did Frogtown, that was my first project. That was 1995. I had an exhibition outdoors in Frogtown. I spent 2 years photographing. And I guess things were pure then, because no one knew who I was. Mm-hmm. And I was making a living as, somewhat of a living, as a freelance journalist and photographer. Mm-hmm. And I can see I got fired from one of my jobs. I was working for City Business newspaper, full-time bartender. And then as I built up my photography business, went to part-time, and then finally was able to quit. Mm-hmm. Mostly because I was working for City Business newspaper, where they were weekly. Mm-hmm. And my degree's in journalism. Mm-hmm. So, but I don't have formal training as a photographer. But it was great to make a living as a photographer. But I really wanted to become an artist when I was about 22. And I took a workshop from Gary Winogrand, a great street photographer. And he was teaching a 1-week workshop in St. Paul through Film in the Cities. Mm-hmm. And then I was able to build up my photography portfolio, make a living, doing all kinds of photography, weddings, graduation pictures, corporate PR events, but mostly editorial, working for newspapers and magazines. And so it was exciting to be able to make a living. Mm-hmm. And then after several years of photographing and trying to illustrate an art director or editor's idea, I got kind of burnt out. Mm-hmm. In City Business, they called me in the office, and nice people. And they're great to work for. But they fired me. Mm-hmm. And they were right to fire me because I wasn't doing good work. And so that was the best thing to happen to me, because it was several weeks after that I started Frogtown. Mm-hmm. So
that was out of your own initiative. It wasn't spurred on by a grant or anything. It was just like, I'm just gonna do this.
Yeah. So basically, I'm 22. I take a workshop from Gary Winogrand. I want to be an artist. And I ended up becoming a commercial photographer, editorial photographer. I remember my girlfriend at the time, we were on a boat. We were on a little canoe, and we were up north somewhere, and I was complaining about not being Gary Winogrand, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And then she said, well, I'm tired of you complaining. So why don't you do something about it? So I remember I got up, I stood up in the boat, and it was actually under like a bridge to give it more symbolic impact. And I said, I vow to do what I wanted to do. Anyhow, so it was several weeks later I got fired. And then I approached Colors Magazine. This is not the Colors Magazine that's owned by Benetton. Mm-hmm. This was a local magazine, and went over to their offices, and I pitched some ideas, several ideas. And he said, go with a neighborhood idea. And so, because I didn't grow up in a diverse neighborhood, I grew up in Duluth. So I drove around thinking about what neighborhoods to photograph, and I decided to photograph Frogtown, because I lived close to Frogtown, and the southern boundary, University Avenue, there were lots of Asian markets and restaurants and so on. So I knew University Avenue, but I didn't know Frogtown. Mm-hmm. And so I decided Frogtown. Mm-hmm. Interesting name. I didn't know much about it. Quarter of the population, I didn't know at the time, but quarter of the population was Hmong immigrants. Just like my family. I'm the only non-immigrant in my family. So I spent the summer of 1993 photographing everyday life in Frogtown. And I was afraid to do it at first, and I walked around without my camera. Finally started, and then 3 months work, and I thought this was the best photographs I'd ever taken, and they published, I can't remember, maybe a dozen photographs, maybe $300. And so I decided to apply for a grant through the Minnesota Historical Society. They were offering research grants, but these are for scholars. But because I was doing interviews with the people I photographed in Frogtown, I was eligible. So I applied for other grants. I received a forecast grant, an MRAC grant.
So the Historical Society didn't even look at your other photographs. Did they even need it? They just based it on proposal. Like it was just.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
I don't really remember the proposal, what it took. But I just remember that if it was just photographs, I wouldn't be eligible. But because I was collecting people's stories. Yeah. Then they could make a case I was doing research. And it was a $5,000 grant, and so I kept going. And at some point I decided I received the forecast grant. And the parameters of the grant was that you have to show it in an untraditional way. And so I was bartending at Sajia still, and I remember a friend of mine came in, smart guy, brilliant guy, and I said, I'm going to have this exhibition outdoors. How do you think I should do it? And he just drew it up on a cocktail napkin. You should put on styrofoam, and then you can shrink wrap it. And you just pin the photo. Anyhow, so
but you had the idea of like showing it in an untraditional way. Well, it's led by a forecasting, so you really were wrapped around like, how do I show this in a different way?
Yeah, I had no idea how to do it. This guy came up with this idea. That's how we did it.
Well, that led to so many things, right? I mean, with Lake Street, it's like, that's interesting to me because we interviewed Javier about this too, but like I know you a lot of times you're using your camera to be able to talk to people, right? You have that interaction, but then it's like where does that photograph go? And a lot of times the photograph goes into a gallery. So I mean it's really cool that you made that jump to come right back into a community setting. And I mean, were there Yeah, there wasn't really a whole lot of precedent for that type of work at the time, right? I mean, were there other?
I'd never seen anything like it.
Yeah.
No one had ever seen anything like
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And I don't have any formal training in photography or art.
Uh-huh.
You know, I come from an immigrant family.
Mm-hmm.
My parents, I never heard them utter the word art.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure they never set foot in a museum.
Mm-hmm.
I was interested in photography.
Mm-hmm.
I bought my first camera I bought a Minolta SLR when I was 20 and became fascinated by photography and would look at photography books and look at street photographers. And so when we did it and put it on University in Dale, and that day that it opened and having this idea and then seeing it actually happen, and the things that I imagined, it's all right there.
Yeah.
And then, but what does it all mean? I don't know what it means.
Mm-hmm.
I just did it. I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
And so then there were no expectations.
Yeah.
I didn't think about, you know, what does it mean to be an artist? Or, I mean, I'm sure I thought about all those things, but I didn't really.
That's what I struggle
Right.
with, you know? Like, this is why I love talking to you, because you've been through this, and I mean, a lot of it is following your intuition. But now that you've done a couple of these projects, you did Frogtown, you did Lake Street, and you've done University Avenue, you know, it's like, after doing those types of community engagements and seeing what residual things might have happened after, for me, you know, working with a developer or like artists working in a community, sometimes it does like highlight things and changes it. Have you seen that happen from projects that you've done? Not necessarily about the gentrification word, but like in like highlighting something and then it turns into something where you're like, oh, I didn't really intend for it to be viewed like that, or it changed this neighborhood in a way. Like, have you ever encountered that?
This is 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I've done a lot in 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everything's about that.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's not about that. Everything's about a lot of things.
Yeah.
So, Frogtown, I get all these interviews.
Uh-huh.
Media grabs onto it.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the impact is on Frogtown? How do you think this helped people?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm an artist. I'm not a sociologist. I'm not an activist.
Yeah.
I'm a photographer. I thought it would be interesting to do.
Uh-huh.
I hid behind my camera.
Uh-huh.
I'm not doing this. I'm doing this because I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
The media starts writing about Frogtown differently.
Mm-hmm.
Now, certainly, I'm aware that for places like Frogtown, what is perception and what is reality?
Mm-hmm.
And Frogtown is the kind of neighborhood you only hear about, it seems, on the news when something bad happens. And how much does the media drive the reputation of neighborhoods?
Mm-hmm.
If there was a shooting or something, even if it wasn't in Frogtown, they would say Frogtown area.
Mm-hmm.
Even asking people what are the boundaries of Frogtown, people don't know.
Mm-hmm.
People in the neighborhood, they'll say, well, Dale is the boundary. Then other people, no, it's Victoria. And then, you know, so I can see a neighborhood as a state of mind.
Mm.
You ask all these people, I mean, I don't know how many interviews, quite a few.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has a different idea about Frogtown.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Frogtown is, you know, get out.
Mm-hmm.
Don't bring your camera here after dark. Other people go, I moved here on purpose. I brought my family here because of the diversity.
Mm-hmm.
Some people talk about Frogtown like just to move to Hamlin was unimaginable.
Yeah.
So what I realized was, you know, I wanted to pick a neighborhood that, like, how does a neighborhood like this work?
Mm-hmm.
You know, all of these coexisting, disparate, colliding realities.
Yeah.
And so people would ask me, what did you do? What are the impacts? I remember talking to someone who worked for the District 7 Council.
Mm-hmm.
And she told me, she said, we try to get loans to do renovation, revitalize the neighborhood. We couldn't get any loans. But because of your project, there was so much media attention. This is her words. The banks came a-running. Okay? Now, I don't know. Who knows? Who knows, right?
Incredible.
So I'm just trying to make a living.
Yeah.
And so then I started getting calls. Now people know who I am.
Yeah.
And I remember one artist said, she came up to me and said, "You're a nobody before Frogtown." But she said it kind of a funny way, like, it's kind of, and then I started getting calls from curators. I didn't even know what a curator did. I'm still not sure. And then and they talk to you kind of in this art way.
Yeah.
And I, sometimes I didn't know what they're saying. I felt kind of stupid. I don't quite understand. I get it, but I don't quite, Anyhow, so then I get but I have to make a living still.
Yeah.
So I was a freelancer, and then I put all my energy into doing the show, and then I spent all the money for the grants, and I went into debt. I went into debt.
Yeah.
And then I had to build my business back up again, right?
Yeah.
And then I would get calls from like college class, intro to photography. Would you come in and tell us how you did Frogtown? Pay you $50 or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so then people would ask me questions, and I had to figure out how to answer. Why did I really do this?
Yeah.
And so my answers, I had to think about it more. It was a process of doing these presentations that I understood better what I was doing. So, or at least I had answers. It exhausted me.
Yeah.
And so then I thought, well, what am I going to do now? And then I started walking Lake Street. I thought, well, and I found a photo that I'd taken in '82.
Talk about Wintergrand. That's like, I was full of it. I mean, I know that photograph of the 4 ladies walking across to Calhoun Square. It's always burned in it. And it's like always like the light is so like Wintergrand. Like it's like it's perfect. It's like almost a homage to him. Like
and so I mean, well, okay. I took my workshop in 1982 from Gary Wintergrand, and I took my first street photographs. I wanted to be an artist. Frogtown was 1995.
Holy shit, man.
13 years passed. I was 40 years old.
Oh my God. Yeah. I didn't realize that. You're the same age as me. Maybe my career will blow up here in a second.
Right? And so then...
This was at 40? You did the canoe? You're like...
No.
I'm going to be an artist.
I was 40 when Frogtown happened.
Okay. Oh, okay.
13 years had passed since the Wintergrand workshop, wanting to be an artist. Damn. And every day that goes by, and if you know what you want to do, that's good. It's also a curse. Because if you don't do it, you're going to be depressed. And every day that goes by, and you're not doing the thing you're going to do, that can paralyze you.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so then I decided, well, why don't I do a bigger project on Lake Street?
Yeah.
And then I applied for grants. I was able to get some grants. Anyhow, 4 years go by, and I decided, well, I'm just going to do all 6 miles of Lake Street. Right? Okay, everything went well.
Yeah.
But I think that just at first I was kind of worried that I would, because now I'm having to answer questions about my process. And then I thought, well, maybe I'm going to be too nice to people when I photograph them. Like we'll lose some kind of edge, right? Because I would tell people I'm not an activist. And what's the difference between activism and propaganda? It's all part of the same coin. You're trying to change things. And I'm just trying to describe how things are from a very my subjective point of view. And but I can see that after a while, I started to realize that what I'm doing is, has larger meaning. But I'm not going to define what that meaning is. You define it. I mean, if you have to write a grant, you have to say something. But I'm not. I'm trying to. That's not how the world should be. It's how the world is. That's what I'm interested in. And so photographing Lake Street, and then I moved into the neighborhood to do the project, so I could do it from the perspective of a resident because I didn't live in Frogtown. So
Where were you on Lake Street?
I was on 17th and between Lake and 31st.
Okay.
You know, photographing thousands of people over 4 years. That's one thing.
Yeah.
Then, but putting together the exhibit, that was hard.
Yeah, that was over 500 photographs, right? How many?
That was 800 photographs to find the
800?
funding. So the grants were not to produce the exhibit. The grants were for me to photograph. So then I had to try to find the money to actually produce the exhibit.
Yeah.
And I wrote, I don't know, like 20 grants to corporations. I didn't get any of them. And then I was able to get some funding from McKnight and Jerome and another forecast grant. Anyhow, 6 Mile exhibition. No one's ever done anything like that. We had an auction. So anyhow, so the company, Photos Inc., they were producing the photographs. They're all darkroom made photographs.
Jesus. Yeah.
And I kept on getting the bills.
Yeah.
I couldn't pay them. But
You couldn't stop though.
I couldn't stop.
Charge that to the game.
So then we had an auction at the end of the exhibit. This is the year 2000.
Yeah.
And we auctioned off about 500 photographs. At first, I thought I was going to make so much money. I was going to start a nonprofit, and then we made enough to pay Photos Inc. And whatever debt I went into Frogtown for,
Doubled it.
well, I declared bankruptcy, 2001, personal bankruptcy. Anyhow, point is that it's not like I'm just at some point, I'm just still a photographer.
Yeah.
I'm still really a journalist.
Well,
I'm just trying to make a living.
Though. It's more than that. I mean, you have had all these things, and I mean, we can even fast forward to now, and this is where I really appreciate the evolution of your work, is that, now you're working on Chicago Ave, right by 38th in Chicago, and, you have this space that isn't just about photography, it is, but like, can you talk about the role that the third place plays in the community, and what role that art plays in the community? I know you can't answer the larger question, but like how did that evolution happen, and what have you what ideas have you been exploring through that?
Yeah, so I think that in one sense, I started off as a street photographer, and I wanted to be an artist. And I was interested in the photograph as this aesthetic object. I wanted to take good photographs. And then my idea of what is good has changed, or it's always changing, right? In some ways it hasn't changed, but in some ways it's changed. And I can see that at some point, at first, how I got that photograph was not that important. It was getting the photograph. But at some point, the process of how I got the photograph became as important, if not more important, than the photograph itself. And it was about the interaction. University Avenue, I did another 6 Mile exhibition, but I didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
Because Lake Street was just exhausted me. It was
exhilarating.
exhilarating.
Surprised you signed up
me.
again. Yeah.
But we got the funding, and I did it, and I realized that how I look at things is different. And so I can incorporate these ideas. And then basically what happened was we had a projection site across from Walmart, drop-down shipping containers, and projected images for 6 months, 5 nights a week. We had this sort of spectacle, a 40-foot, 2 projectors, 2 screens that were so hundreds of images. And one thing it made me think about was I thought it was going to be more interactive. We wanted it to be more interactive. We thought, well, we should have picnic tables, people would bring games, it would hang out, but it became more of a spectator space. 2011, the first Northern Spark, I was invited by Steve Dietz to do an installation. So I decided to, if we were to really make a space interactive, what would we do? So I thought ping pong tables. So we had 10 ping pong tables. Or over on the West Bank, I called it a ping pong retrospective, and I projected 1,300 images over one evening, and hundreds of people came to play ping pong who didn't know each other. And anyhow, so I thought, and the photographs were just more the background. The interaction was so. Then, at that time, I was trying to figure out how am I going to sustain what I do.
Yeah.
Besides just keep applying for grants. And so I thought I wanted to have a gallery where I could really focus on the gallery and really try to sell my own photographs.
Yeah.
And so that's when I decided to move into the third place and have events that would be sort of like an extension of my public art projects. So we opened the third place in 2011. It was a month before that Northern Spark.
Yeah.
And wasn't quite sure what I was doing, but just thought to have something that I would be interesting. And the third place, Rich Lee, good friend of mine, professor at the University of Minnesota, he said, you should call it the third place. I said, wow, what does that mean? And he said, well, there's all sorts of social theory about third places. Anyhow, so called third place, and I would invite people that I knew that I thought would be, how do you have an art event or art-driven event that's not about wine and cheese and small talk? And so that you don't have to be interested in that particular artist or that art form to come and have fun and learn something. So first I invited artists that I knew, and then people would approach me, and then I'm trying to figure out what makes a third place art event. So there's no like definition, but I can see basically it's if I'm interested or not. It's an informal space. It's not, I'm not, we have exhibited other people's work, but it's just really a one-night event. And now it's 4.5 years later, and we've had maybe about 60 events.
That's crazy.
I'm not a nonprofit.
Yeah.
I make a living doing lectures and workshops.
Yeah.
And so when people would invite me to give a presentation, first it was the Photo 1 class, and then it was the sociology department calling me, and then it was, all different kinds of organizations and classes were calling me in to not just talk about photography, but to talk about cultural landscape, basically. And I was giving a presentation at North Hennepin Community College. This is like 12 years ago. And it was for a Photo 1 class. And community college students are often older. And there was one person in the audience who asked some very sophisticated questions. And afterwards, this person came up to me and I said, wow, I really like your questions. And she says, well, you better, I'm the president of the college. And this is the best presentation on diversity without it being about diversity. And so then I started to develop sort of curriculums for schools based on my photographic process. How does what I do have value for anybody? I walk down the street and I interact with strangers, thousands of strangers, and I'm confronted by my own biases. So I used to think of the presentations or the workshops as being a separate thing. There's what I do as an artist, and then there's what I do as a presenter. And then I started thinking of them as part of the same thing. And that every time I have a presentation, it's like I'm having an exhibition, or it's performance art. And then I started thinking, the impact I have on students is probably greater than any museum exhibit I've ever had. And so then I started to think about of them as the same thing, and then how to incorporate the two together. And so that's why I'm working on this new project. What do you see? This new curriculum for schools and so on.
Yeah.
But the thing is that what I did as a photographer drove what I talked about. I can see at some point what I talked about drove what I did as an artist. And now they became intertwined. And so the third place is another thing that I do.
Yeah.
But I fund it with my presentations and workshops. But my personal life and my professional life are really kind of the same.
Yeah. You live above.
I live above a coffee shop.
Yeah.
2 doors down from the third place. I don't have a family to support. I just support myself. And supporting myself is a challenge.
Yeah.
I'm an independent artist. So in one sense, this is what I do for a living. This is my job. And I make a living, but you know, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
And
well,
but
it's always evolving too. I mean, it's like even the news situation is like the success that you've had in the gallery has brought on other, you know, interest, and it's like you may even be pushed out of where you're at because of your success. So it's like, can you?
You could blame me for gentrifying myself,
Yeah.
for gentrifying the neighborhood, and gentrifying myself out of the neighborhood. That's possible. The landlord could say, "Yeah, it's
did
great
it to
that you're in
yourself."
the yeah, yeah, you brought a lot of value to the neighborhood, but we're going to jack up the rent now because the restaurant wants your space."
Well, I mean,
who knows? I don't know.
I mean,
Yeah.
that isn't you know, part of that is yeah, like how do we sustain ourselves and how do we actually put a foothold down where you're at? Because that is your neighborhood, right? Like, I mean, how have you thought of
I
strategies?
don't want to own.
Yeah. Oh, you don't want to.
I don't want
It's okay to just go. That idea can go anywhere, right? Third place. So it's
Well,
like,
I don't know. Who knows?
yeah.
I don't think like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
Funny.
What I'm
I mean, that's what.
I don't know what I'm going to be doing.
That's
next
the
year.
whole torture thing that I have, and it's stupid. I mean, after doing all these interviews, it's like a lot of good people like make good artwork because it's intuitive, and it's not like this is the vision for what I want to do. It's like, no, I'm making decisions based upon what is happening around me and the shifting things that are happening around me, and I can't answer these things for myself. That's why I'm asking you guys to answer these questions. But
well, I do. I mean, it is important to have an idea what you're going to, you know, how to have a business plan.
yeah.
And if you just want to create for the sake of creating,
Yeah.
you know, well, good luck. But it's good to have a business plan
Yeah.
and to think like a business person. I mean, that's basically I am an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And and I realize it's not curators who call me; it's educators.
Yeah.
And so, how to combine the two? And so, I think, I have a long range plan.
So I just wanted to thank you for coming, Wing. I really appreciate the time. I know we'll hash out some of these other things that I always have questions about. You're an ongoing resource, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. All right, Witt.